right. In true producer style, I feel like we should get ready and start this exactly on time. No delays whatsoever. Welcome. This is Leveling Up Your Production from Good to Great. So glad to have you all here with us. I am Kelsey Gamble, and I'm going to be moderating today. I'm joined with a fabulous panel of a bunch of people who I'm going to read the bios out for now, so let me bring it out. Directly to my left, we have Elizabeth Blythe. With one of the more colourful paths into the video game industry, Elizabeth is a project delivery master who honed her career at well-known companies such as NAB, IBM, and EA. She originally joined Summerfall Studios in 2018 while on sabbatical from a consulting firm, ultimately led to her joining EA's Fire Monkeys as Senior Development Director. Elizabeth recently left EA to return to Summerfall as their Studio Development Director. I lost my place already. Good job, me. Over the
We're good.
We did it. Over the years, she's delivered numerous projects in video games, technology applications, infrastructure, and global services. Give a hand for Elizabeth. Thank you so much. And to the left of Elizabeth, we have the fabulous Meredith Hall. Meredith is a multi-award-winning producer, business developer, and marketer. Formerly at Vic Screen, funding local indie developers, she's now the marketing director at Summerfall as well. Summerfall are legion, apparently, today. She is also co-founder of Accessibility Unlocked, lead producer at studios Aconite and Strange Scaffold, a frequent public speaker, and industry consultant for developers, platforms, and publishers. She was named one of 50 under 50 in InGame's 2019 Gender Equality in Games list. That's a very long sentence. And was named Rising Star at the 2020 Actors. Give it up for Meredith. And finally, we've got Cass Gray. Cass Gray is the digital producer for Melbourne XR studio PHORIA. Working in the industry for 5 years, Cass has worked as a producer and events manager at studios across Australia and New Zealand, including Weta Workshop, Dinosaur Polo Club, and Samurai Punk. In addition to her work as a developer, Cass has also served as chairperson of the New Zealand Game Developers Association between 2018 and 2020, and ran events for the NZ Games Festival. Give it up for Cass.
I'm the token non-Summerfall person on the panel, just to give it some variety.
We need diversity. So let's get started. Even though I've read out your bios, for each of you on the panel, what do you want people to know about your role as a producer? Anything that I didn't already cover?
I mean, for me, my work with Strange Scaffold and Aconite is a little bit odd. I'm 3 days at Summerfall most of the time, and then the rest of my time is split between everyone that I consult with. So a lot of that work and that production is done completely remotely and completely asynchronously. There is sometimes like an hour of overlap where you can have a meeting, but otherwise every communication that you're having, you're pretty much doing it in text at all different times. So it definitely makes it interesting.
Absolutely. How about you, Elizabeth?
Ooh. Well, for myself, I think that one of the most important maybe misconceptions about being a producer is that it's actually about the team and my doing what I can to facilitate their jobs as opposed to anything that I myself really am doing any day. It's really nice in the sense that I get a lot of variety and I can be involved in a lot of different places. But yeah, production isn't me producing anything. It's me helping other people do stuff that I myself can't do, which makes it very exciting.
How about yourself, Kaz?
Yeah, I guess like the one thing I'd sort of say is that it's not super relevant, I guess, to the actual work that I do, but the studio I'm working for at the moment, I would call more games adjacent. My favourite term that I picked up in New Zealand was interactive media. We work on interactive things. And the other thing, I guess, I was just thinking about it after Mary was talking about her hours. I'm sort of working part-time at the moment because I've been off on and off for about 2 years with health issues and with the disability that I have now. So I guess just some context for where I'm coming from is that I'm coming back to work off this, huge period of time off where I've just been, spending a lot of time on the couch not doing anything. And that's not meant in like a self-deprecating way or to say that, I'm not where I used to be. I guess it's just context for my thoughts and stuff now.
Absolutely. So these days we tend to see a lot of production 101 panels, but there's not a whole lot that extend that knowledge. And you know, certainly I said yes to moderating this panel because mostly I wanted to know the answers that you were going to be answering. But do you think that there's any reason why, you know, other than going into very niche of things, there's no leveled up panels for the most part?
I was thinking about this, and the thing that sort of came to me first is that because production, you sort of, when you start production, it's almost quite straightforward. There's, you know, you learn agile or waterfall, you learn, you know, about like stand up, you learn the tasks, and then once you know, you're in a studio and you're doing production, it changes so much from studio to studio and person to person. And so it's almost like, it's quite difficult to give like a, you can't just give like a consistent, this is what production is past the beginning point. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that you don't hear a lot of, like, you get like either tech talks or, you know, or 101 talks, I think, a lot.
I also think part of it is that production generally is a pretty often undervalued role. I think there's an expectation that anyone can be a producer if they learn those kind of 101s, like 101 skills. But a lot of the time there's inherent learning that needs to happen outside of that around team management or like even human resources and psychology sort of stuff that is really difficult to do. And so a lot of the time when people are in these production roles, if that role's being undervalued for a period of time or an extended period of time, they leave. Like they don't stay in that role, or they go and they do it in another industry where they feel that they have that value. And you know, a lot of that work output is invisible. So if your team doesn't understand it or you're not able to kind of advocate for yourself and express that work, I think we lose a lot of producers before they hit 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, which means we have that gap as we build up again.
Yeah. I would agree with that, but I would also add that it's very hard, even from a long-time producer, to create information that is worthwhile to share to a mixed audience. So if you don't know the level of experience of the audience that you're providing a panel or a presentation to, it's almost like you have to make the whole universe to make a pie. And how do I explain to you how to do a pie if I haven't told you all these little bits beneath it? And how do I know where you sit? And particularly if there's a difference in audience members and we don't know that they're all coming from the same place and have the same language. And I do think that there is room for an increase in that same language across the games industry.
Absolutely. Do you think that there's anything that you've, you know, learnt or taken on throughout the course of your career that you think can help with that? Or do you think we're all still just figuring it out as we go along?
I think there's a benefit in figuring some parts of it out as you go along. Like, I think one of the biggest mistakes that producers make, especially as they make a transition from one place to another, is like, I'm going to take all the things that worked here and dump them here, and that's going to be fine. And it never is. Like, you've got different personalities, you've got different teams, you've got different hours, different priorities. So figuring out what core like structures and systems actually work, less so than the application of them, so that you can then take that information and take that knowledge and apply it to new, different scenarios. Like, it's actually okay to be a little bit out of your depth, because that's going to put you in a position to fact find and understand your team better and put new, better processes in place that if you took them here, they would fall apart.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, that's all right. You can go.
I just want to add to that because Meredith said everything that I would say, but also the one part about getting a bit out of your comfort zone is I would recommend mentoring. I've done quite a lot of it, but I don't do it just so that way I can tell people about my skills and how production works from my perspective. I learn from the people that I'm working with because I learn about the problems that they're having, and I can touch on things that maybe I've never experienced before. And so I think that it's a really good exchange there, and I would highly recommend that. Sorry.
I think, like, going on also from what we were all just building on what Meredith, the foundation
Thanks,
that Meredith
Mary.
lays
Good
down.
job.
Perfect foundation, Meredith.
We're producing it.
Yeah, of course we are. Is one of the most important things that I think I've learned, and I apologize in advance if any of my former teachers are here. One of the most important things that I found is unlearning things that I learned when I was studying and when I was learning to be a producer. Like, I had great teachers and they did an amazing job at teaching me the fundamentals of production, but, you know, it's very different when you actually get out into the workplace and every studio is different, and, you get to them. Like, I remember, the first place I worked, I was very like, well, I have to stick to, we stand up for stand-ups. We do them, each day in the morning. We do, X and Y. And then you sort of eventually go, well, that's not going to work for everyone. And, the place I'm currently working, we weren't doing stand-ups for a little bit. Ooh.
What? Get out of here.
Although it doesn't really count because I did introduce stand-ups. I was like, no, this is too different. But yeah, so it's been quite a long process of, I think one of the first things I do when I start at a studio is to go, all right, well, what are you doing now? Let's do that for a week. And then I'm going to figure out what I can add in, what I can take away, what I think you need. And often, yeah, like the production that I do looks absolutely nothing like the production that I was doing when I was a student, or even at my first job.
Speaking of unlearning, but maybe flipping it around, are there any things throughout the course of your career that you wish you had learned earlier?
Excel formulas.
I wish that I learned earlier when I was in a negotiation.
Oh.
Very early on in my career, I would have something very typical like this. Somebody would rock up to me and say, oh, Elizabeth, you know how we were going to deliver this in August? Well, now you have until June. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go die in another room now. No. I have learned that anytime something changes, it's a negotiation. Oh, okay, well, if you want me to get this done by June, then I guess I'm going to need 3 more people and another $100,000. Are you okay with that? No? Okay, well, then we're still having a negotiation until we get to a point where I felt comfortable with the result.
Yeah.
And just never settle until you're comfortable with the result.
Totally. Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
I was just saying, I remember learning, like, the meeting that I was in when my producer who was mentoring me at the time taught me about, like, the yes but thing, where they're like, hey, can we do this? And then you're like, well, we can do it, but then something's got to give. And that was really kind of game changing.
I think also like identifying the problem that exists, not the problem that you think exists.
Yes.
Like a lot of the time you'll be dealing with like conflict within a team and someone will bring something to you, and if you take it at face value, you'll often just start actioning and be like, I'm going to solve this and I'm going to go and I'm going to do this. But often actually pausing and stopping and really hearing that problem will uncover a whole host of other things or something very specific. And sometimes you don't need to take action at all. That person just needs to be heard. So understanding when to pull back versus when to push is something that I think everyone is always learning if they're a producer, but definitely getting that sense of not rushing to resolve earlier.
Other than the experience and knowing eventually, by gut what's going to happen,
Yeah.
do you have any tips for people out there that, might know that this is something that's an area that they need to work on, but don't really know where to start, don't know how to improve? Is there some suggestions that you could potentially give?
So for me, I often talk with like peer mentors about this idea of like the 2 schools of production and how they marry, where you've got kind of like technical production and you've got cultural production, and that there's a real relationship between those things and the sort of structures you put into place. Because, for example, something like a daily stand-up, if you're someone with health issues, that may literally be not possible for you. So understanding how the technical things you apply affect culture is really important. So for me, one of the best things to learn about, and I think there's a talk about it in the next couple of days, was psychological safety and the concept of it and how you build psychologically safe teams and allow people to kind of gain access to being able to talk about mistakes. I think it's Amy Edmondson, and she was talking about how these really skilled teams were having more mistakes. And she was like, is it that they're having more mistakes or that they're actually able to bring mistakes up and resolve them together? And that is a core function of a psychologically stable team. So understanding theory that doesn't necessarily exist in the game space specifically, but that is more about like leadership and interaction and tone and context is so valuable.
I was just like thinking about like things that I've learned. Like another sort of game changer for me was learning to ask more questions. Like when I first started out, I was terrified of asking questions, especially like at my first job, because I was very intimidated by everyone. Because everyone's amazing and smart. And in my first job, we were doing some very like boundary pushing stuff, and I was like, well, I can't ask questions. Like then they'll think I don't know anything. And then it was actually the same producer who was mentoring me was like, well, no, I ask questions all the time, because sometimes people need you to ask questions for them to work things out themselves. And now I ask way too many questions. I ask questions about everything. Like sometimes I ask questions about things I know the answer to because I know that it's going to provoke a discussion that needs to happen.
Yeah. I would like to add to that. I usually start with don't panic when somebody brings something up. And rather than going into that action mode, I always try to put like a 24-hour limit on it. And my job in that 24 hours is to, as Cass says, ask questions and find out as much as I can about the problem from different perspectives in the team. And so that will often be something like you talk to Anne, and Anne says, the sky is falling. And then you talk to Joe, and Joe says, I took care of that yesterday. You don't need to worry about it. But if I had actioned off of what Anne said, then maybe. So I can just go back to Anne and say, oh, we solved it this way. And Anne could be perfectly happy. I might have to talk to several different people. But the first thing that I always do is like try to control my own emotional response so I can get into that question mode.
Absolutely. Speaking of, we've been touching on a whole bunch of soft skills here in general. Are there any other skills that you've found throughout the course of your career you've had to develop a lot?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I think we've already had Excel formulas come up. But I think production, because you're touching on so many spaces, you'll often end up sitting in, and this is the space that I ended up sitting in, across kind of business development, across marketing, and kind of the merging of those spaces and how they interact with each other. So for me, leveling up my production skills of understanding like a schedule and a budget and a pitch and what is being promised to a publisher versus what is being promised to an audience, that helps me understand the team's work and what direction we need to head in so that we can actually meet those expectations and de-risk them. So I found that I was building a lot of spreadsheets that or documents that at a glance you kind of be like, why does this exist? Like, why is this writing down, problems with these other games? And it's like, well, actually, if you're looking at all the reviews on these similar games, sure, you can do that for marketing, but that's actually super useful for production because it's going to tell you where your potential problems are at release.
Thanks for that spreadsheet, by the way. It's really well.
Budgets is something that I wish that I had put more time into learning about earlier in my career. Mostly because it's something that I still haven't done, and if I'd done it earlier in my career, then I wouldn't have to worry about it now. It's not something that has explicitly affected me yet, because at the places I've worked, we've had other people who's handled it, but it is something that you need to think about as a producer, especially once you get up to, I guess, higher levels of production, because you are managing the resources and stuff like that. And as someone who is really not a mathematical person, it's very easy to just go, well, that's not directly part of my role, so I don't need to worry about it.
I've always been the opposite. I'm very technically strong. To me, it's like math. It fits, it's true or false, it's binary. I've always found that my weakness is the people aspect, and every team is different. So what worked yesterday doesn't work today, and having to figure out what's the path in order to navigate the social situations that I end up in. But I think that's because I came out of uni and I'd already taken project management at uni and so on. So I have found one of the things I think that the games industry would do well with is people spending time in that education space, going to learn about project management, seeking to get their project management professional PMP credential, seeking Scrum credentials, whatever things that you can do in that space in order to educate yourself formally, I think would be of benefit to a lot of producers or people who would want to upskill.
So what do you think? This is probably the broadest question of all time. I'm really curious to hear how you're going to answer it. But what do you think the number one challenge of a producer is?
What? Number one?
Number one.
Today? Or
I'm not sorry.
Yeah, today.
All time?
This week.
So let's take it into three. Let's do just in general, off the top of your head. Let's do 2022.
Okay.
And then let's do for yourself personally.
I think speaking generally, and this is just the first thing that popped into my head, and I suppose I'm literally as we're doing this panel, I'm I do focus a lot more on the soft skills and stuff, but something that is quite difficult for me sometimes is the emotional labor that we kind of have to do, and it's not even necessarily emotional labor makes it sound like you're having emotional conversations, but when you're managing a team of people, you are kind of managing people's frustrations a lot of the time, and it and you know, even when it's not about you, it can be like a little bit tiring. But you know, as a producer, I mean, not as a producer like necessarily, but I always try and, you know, still look, if not friendly, like, you know, I'm not going to go around
Not a
snapping at
dick.
people, right?
Yeah.
And so you kind of just have to, you know, take a deep breath. Working from home has been really good for that, actually. So you can just kind of like turn your monitor off and just, and, you know, take a moment.
Amazing. Elizabeth.
So day to day, my job is solving problems, but the one that's reoccurring that I think is just this ongoing like personal growth thing is resilience, managing stress, taking care of myself, even though I'm in a high pressure role that has a lot of people dependent on me, and I of course am dependent on a lot of people for my success. So I think that finding ways to set and manage my boundaries, both in terms of time and health, are things that are ongoing, and probably since the very start of my career, I've had to learn to get better and better, and deliberately better and better over that.
Yeah, I literally wrote down the word boundaries, so I appreciate that. Yeah, I think for me, being that, you know, I have a part-time role that's quite a large chunk of the week, and I don't work weekends because as much as I can possibly do so, because I need to for my health. So for me, it was about recognizing when I have capacity and when I don't, and being willing to say that. But also, and I think this is part of the from good to great, is that you don't necessarily have to be great at everything. I know when I was early in my career as a producer, I was like, I've got to get better at the technical side. Like, I can't do a good enough spreadsheet, and I must defeat Excel. And then I got to a point where I was like, actually, I have these skills in another area. If I double down on that, I'm going to be much more valuable to the people that need that kind of work than if I try to do everything. And I think we're very used to wearing a lot of hats in indie dev and generally in dev. So accepting that those things aren't a weakness, you're just leaning into your strengths, because that's going to serve you better when you get into different studios.
Do you think that helps with the 2022 part of this question, or is 2022 different? Does it look different? Are the challenges different, or is it always going to be these answers?
I mean, for me, like, you know, Elizabeth was talking about health, and like obviously health has been a big focus of my life for the last couple of years, and that has been a really big challenge for me, is acknowledging the fact that I can't, even though I'm getting better at the moment, like I can't do as much as I used to be able to. And, you know, so I'm working part-time now, but when I first started doing that, I was like, well, I can't be a producer part-time. I need to be there all the time, because, you know, who will produce the people? And I was like, oh no, like, you know, once you've got the structure in place, you don't need to be there to full-time to manage it. And I mean, even just from like, this is such a specific challenge, but like, one of the parts of my health problems, my disability, is that my eyesight is impaired now. And so I've had to relearn how to use my computer because I use a screen reader now and a magnifier. And I never realized how much time producers spend like reading small writing on like spreadsheets and websites and documents, and like, so like I'm just sitting at my computer like going like this, trying to see everything. Although the place I'm working now got me some amazing equipment, so that was really good. But you know, then you have to learn how to use the equipment. So I guess that's like my specific for 2022 and that challenge.
I guess in 2022, the difference is that I have learned to let go of things. Delegation is your friend, and building trusting relationships with people that you can trust them to take care of things for you is really important. So I think now I'm just more used to doing that.
Yeah, the delegation thing is so true. Like I, for ages, thought I kind of had to do everything as a producer, and you know, as I sort of grew and matured as a producer, I just said the phrase "as a producer" like 3 times in one sentence.
Hey, we are on a producer.
As a producer, like recognizing that I don't need to be responsible for the things that I'm not responsible for, like, and trusting that other people, you know, will do that, because that's why we're all there, right? We're all there to do their jobs, and I'm there to do my job, and I don't need to you know, hover over people most of the time. To make sure that, you know, they're doing their job and stuff.
Just to bounce off that a little bit, like, I think the big thing in 2022, if looking outwards, and it does still lead into boundaries, is like maintaining access for people as we return or don't return or hybridly return to the office. Like, people's way of working has changed drastically. And for me, with my own health issues, that ability to have access to setting up structures for people that are more accessible, like to let them work the way that they want and need to work, rather than just trying to enforce a specific outcome. That should have been possible before, but I think it took the pandemic for people to recognise that people will work and like working.
Wild.
Yeah, crazy. But yeah, I think that's a big challenge at the moment for producers in general, is how do you balance the needs of your team that have come out of the past couple of years, your own needs that have come out of the past couple of years, and moving forward towards the goals you have.
Oh, wow. Perfect segue. Mary, you're the best. Speaking of goals that you have, what is something that you're learning right now? What are you working on? What are you trying to level up for yourself? I know, asking all the hard questions.
I think for me, going back to that, like accepting the things that I'm not as powerful at. Like, I have definitely been affectionately harassing Elizabeth as much as possible because she is an incredibly technical producer and I want to learn as much as I possibly can. But for me, it's much more about like building systems that don't really exist. Like the teams that I work with are very ad hoc, very odd. I mean, Strange Scaffold is a phenomenal studio, but it's no one's full-time job. Not even the director. So it's a really different structure, working on a bunch of projects at any one time. And I'm there like 4 hours a fortnight. So figuring out priorities and throwing out this idea of like, okay, production's meant to look this way. Now I'm in a structure that there's no one else that I know that is doing that kind of structure. And so for me, not having peers that are trying to grapple with those kind of problems, it's all learning on the fly. And it's a great challenge, but it's definitely a challenge.
May I help you? I would just like to say that in 2022, you know how I said that delegation and whatnot, and we were talking a little bit about systems that you set up. One of the things that I really like to do is, whereas I like to think I'm a very trusting person, is I still want to set up these like boundaries or controls or these places where, you know, if the oven temperature is too high, I know that meal's going to burn. So why don't I just monitor the oven temperature? I find the places in the system where I can most effectively monitor and leverage what I need to know. And I can create those places as well. So Meredith might think, okay, well, here's a project that I'm doing, and it doesn't match the normal criteria that I have. But what are the important things that I need to know this is going well and that it will be successful? Okay, I'll put some eyes on that, and this is the way that I'm going to go about that.
Yeah, where do I actually insert value in this system? And I mean, I think production to a degree, like anything in game dev, is kind of a team sport. Like you need people that are engaging in the same way. And I'm not the only producer at Strange Scaffold, like to be clear. Like there is a team of people who also are putting in hours here and also are putting in hours here and there. So understanding and communicating and using tools as well. Like I've worked with Scrum bots that will ping you all, and it doesn't matter that you're all in different time zones. It will ping you at a responsible, respectful time, and you respond when you're ready, and it goes straight into a Discord channel. Like, don't be afraid to automate things that are not at the top of that priority list. Like, find what works, keep it simple, and feel free to move forward. You can always change it, but find the path and go if you can.
That's something I'm learning at the moment. You just reminded me. Thank you. Well, I'm learning about Asana at the moment, to get very, very specific. I've used it before for like events and things, but never as a production tool. And the structure that we kind of have, which was set up before I got there, is very different to the way that I've done it before. And when I was like, oh my God, this is not traditional production. What am I going to do? But as I've sort of used it and gone on with it, I'm like, actually, this is kind of a cool way of doing things. But it means that, you know, I'm relearning how that works. And I'm also learning about like the automations that they have. But something else that I'm learning that I literally just thought of then is like without getting specific, like we're doing a lot more client work than I've done like in recent times. And so I'm relearning how to, you know, communicate and work with clients and to be building these production schedules that have to also fit in, you know, with their timelines and negotiate with their production software and stuff like that.
Awesome. Speaking of like practical tools and software, what are some that you can suggest to those that are trying to level up their own game? Any tools that have been an absolute game changer for you? I've said game like 4 times.
The one that I just mentioned before is called Orly. It's pretty new. It hasn't been around for a long time, and it is at times a little buggy, but it is really effective if you're using something like Discord and you do want to kind of just ping people at a certain time of day, to put all that in one space so that if you are working asynchronously, you can make that happen. Also, get a bot to push all of your commits as well to a channel, just so that you can see that. Like, a lot of it is just improving visibility, and there's a lot of bots and tools that will do that will connect to your Monday or your Asana or your Jira and pull that stuff into wherever your team actually exists, so that they don't have to go kind of diving for it all the time.
Would I be like booed out of the room if I told people they should learn Jira? No, not really. I don't know. I'm like, for ages, I really liked Jira, like probably more than anyone should, but, you know. But I sort of, it's the most commonly used one that I've found. So I'm like, but I think it's good to get a range of different, you know, product, like task tracking software and get experience with it. And a lot of them you can just go in and, you know, there's like a free version you can use. And they all kind of teach you something different, I've found. Like Jira, the times I've used it, you can get a lot more technical and a lot more, you can really get in there and move things around and do whatever you want. And then, you know, I used Monday, and that was a lot more... It's going to sound like I'm insulting Monday. I'm not. I don't mean this as like a bad thing, but it's a lot more surface level kind of, you know, and then Asana is almost...
Good.
Yeah, like Asana is kind of a mix of the two almost, and it's been really fun to get into Asana and see what you can kind of do and what you can automate, you know, and the wider variety that you've got, the more likely that, you know, you go to a new place and they go, hey, we're using this one you've never seen before. It's going to be similar to something that you've used before. So even if you don't, like, just go in and to get the free thing, set up like a pretend project and just mess with things. And are you writing that down because you're going to go home and do it?
Go and
Mess with things?
No, I was writing down because I had the thought of, you know, like the comms of the tools you use, right? Like those things being visible, and you've got the surface level and you've got the dive. And it reminded me that, like, when you're working with people in different time zones a lot of the time and you're trying to sync up a time to actually review this kind of stuff, there is a tool, I think it's just called timezone.bot or something, but you put in the time you want to meet and you just paste the thing in Discord and it will show it in their time zone.
I'm sorry,
and you
what?
don't have to stuff around. I know, it changed my
Everyone
life.
in the room is just
what did
like,
you say it's called?
I think it's literally called time zone. Actually, Hammer Time, I believe it's called. I have to give the credit to...
Hammer Time?
Hammer Time, yep.
Yes.
Hammer Time.
To the producer that I work with, Kawa, at Strange Scaffold. They found it, and it, like, totally changed that back and forth of, like, is this 4 a.m. on your day? No, that's Friday for me. Like, it just threw that out. So 100% recommend.
I've just been
check this
using the
out.
thing in Google Calendar where you can show like a second time zone. I'm like, but that sounds much better. I've written
But I think it is only for Discord, to my knowledge. It might be a Slack thing. I
That's
don't know.
useless to me, Mary.
Sorry.
God.
All right, so I use right now the holy trilogy of Miro, Jira, and Excel, and I did get that Miro to Jira connection working where I can create Jira cards in Miro and update them automatically in Jira. I am very proud of this because I went a year fighting for this at another studio that I worked at. However, what I found is that every tool has the thing that it does well. You know, Jira is great for task management, but not so good for visual planning. Miro is wonderful for visual planning, but you can have tasks all over the board that have no sense of any structure and whatsoever. So use Jira for that. Excel I like because I do a lot of budgets, whether I'm budgeting time or capacity or something of that nature. Really like that. So my underlying message is use a tool for what it's good for. And if you try a tool and it's not doing what you want it to do, don't try to make it work. Just abandon it and try something else. And with that said, I came in here today literally asking every producer I know, do you know a better scheduling tool than Asana? I'm sorry, I am going to knock Asana because
That's okay. It's okay.
It's a war.
I cannot schedule non-working days. So if I have a 15-day task, it automatically thinks people are working on the weekends, and I'm not willing to schedule people to work on the weekends, and it will put my schedule way out. So I've actually gone back to the dreaded MS Project, and I really don't like MS Project from a very long history of, for compliance reasons, having to use it. Yes, so I am looking for something better, and if you know something better,
Just make a
come
note
talk to me
here.
afterwards.
So it's
Production war with Summerfall. Does not like Asana.
I remember like one of the first things that I did, probably like in my first year of being informed that I was a producer essentially, was I put together a document of like 10 of the ones that were being talked about. It's still up on Medium, like somewhere, of being like, here are all the different production tools, and here's like the really short brief of like what they're good for and what they're not so good for. And honestly, like most of those websites now for any of these tools are really good at putting that forward. They may not get so into the what they're not so good at, but honestly, 2 seconds of Googling and you can quickly give yourself like, build your own checklist. Like be like, this is what I need, go through and just actually see what is giving you the best result.
I cannot believe that I forgot when we were saying stuff we're learning. I've been learning about Miro. I know everyone's been using Miro apparently, except me, for ages. And then, like, I had sort of seen it at, I think one of the places I was working at, because it's such a good tool for, like, remote. Because one of the biggest things during the pandemic has been, like, well, not one of the biggest things, probably just one of it. For me, it's like, because as most producers do, I love whiteboards. And I'm like, how do I recreate the whiteboard experience? And how do I do
mailing
retros?
you a whiteboard.
How do I do retros without a whiteboard? It's a problem that wasn't answered until Miro. And so, but now the team I'm working with uses Miro for everything. So I've been learning it. I'm like, this is just the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm not being paid by Miro. If there's anyone from Miro here and they want to pay me, like, I'll take it.
We're open to sponsorships.
I'll take it. You can sponsor me. But yeah, no, Miro is like amazing.
So we've talked a lot about like production skills and Miro and a lot of Asana. But are there any less than obvious things that you kind of find yourself doing or using a lot that we haven't already covered off?
I use Notion to run my own life, and I highly recommend using it to run documentation, especially if you're a really like quite a small team. It is a beautiful, beautiful system of tracking things that can live in one place, and you don't end up with the kind of like Google Drive horrorscape.
Don't knock my Google Drive.
That you can I cleaned mine the other day. Took me so long.
Leveling up your production game. Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, I definitely recommend Notion. Like you can do a lot with it, but it is quick and easy to use. So if you're looking for something that you can just start and then kind of figure out along the way, that's a great place to start. And you can always migrate your stuff from there onto other platforms or places.
I use Notion too, but I want to move away from tools and I want to actually talk about pattern recognition. So when I was an early project manager, producer, I would not recognize the things that are always problems. Example, most projects in some way, shape, or form are constrained on resources, whether it be people, skills, money, time. There is going to be some sort of constraint in your project. And learning how to not stress about that because you've seen it 40 times before is a very different situation. And I realized at some stage, probably around the 3 to 5 year mark, that, oh, I've seen that before, and that used to stress me out, and now it doesn't because I've seen it before and I know how I dealt with it. And so when you are a producer and you're in those roles, pay attention to those things that happen more than once. And when it happens a third time, start to think your way through, well, what are these like bag solutions and tools that I can put into my back pocket so that way the next time it pops out, I don't have to think about it as much.
Awesome.
One of the mantras that I've started using is that there's no problem that can't be solved. And, sometimes that solution might be a bad solution, but it's a solution. And that's, I found that when, suddenly everything's falling apart and everyone's panicking and, you just go, well, all right, there's a solution here. And I found that sometimes even just saying to, people come to you and they go, hey, this thing's not working. And you go, all right, well, what do we need to do to fix it? What's the solution? And then they go, oh, yeah, we just need to do this one thing. And I'm like, cool. And I think that's just one of the things we do as producers, right? Is just, talk to people until they come up with the answer. But,
Write it down, everybody.
Put it on a shirt.
Solution.
Yeah,
No, that's true.
We're getting the 10-minute hand wave. But yeah, it's just. I forgot what the rest of that said. Sorry.
I've been talking to people
we
until
know-
they have an answer is the way to go.
I just got very excited about that because one of the things I wrote down, like at one earlier point in time when we were answering questions, and I get to say is to be humble. Like, don't think you have the solution. In fact, don't even try sometimes. Like, if you don't have enough energy, just talk to the person next to you. They will have the solution. They'll be happy to give it to you, and they'll feel so much better when you've implemented their solution. Just, it's worth it in order to let the team be the ones in order to lift the boat, and you just kind of point where you want it to go.
Like, probably you don't have the solution.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly if you don't have the technical skills and whatnot. You got to bring those minds together, and they'll get you there.
Yeah, I mean, like, all the problem solving I do really is, like, I get the people together in a room and they go, here are the options. And I go, well, this is the one I think that we should do based on, the schedule we have or whatever. But yeah, I think that I very rarely have the actual solution.
I would add to that sometimes the real production skills to know when you should get people in the room because it will get you the solution, and when you shouldn't bring the people together in the room because it is not going to get you to a solution. It's just going to cause more of a problem.
Yeah. I think additionally, there's a phrase in marketing that says that we work in PR, not ER. And I think we need a similar for production in that ultimately, we're all game developers, we're working in this field. There's going to be stressful things that happen, but there are solutions, and at the end of the day, nobody is hopefully dying. So I think that's one thing to think about when you're reflecting is that taking that home with you and managing that stress and pulling it around with you is going to really exhaust you really quickly. So make sure that you're also doing things on the flip side to support your own work. I think it's really important to be humble about it and to seek those solutions. But also, if someone says something nice to you and is like, hey, you really helped me with this thing, or you unblocked me on something that was really stressing me out, put that in a folder. Put it in your nice things folder and save it for the days where you're like, I don't even know what to do here. Open that folder on that day and understand that you do have an impact on that team. Don't be so hard on yourself about it.
When I worked at Weta Workshop, I was reading Clinton Keith's book, of the production stuff, and there was one about notes of encouragement, and that's something I started doing at Weta when I worked there. And so I would go around leaving notes on people's desks about stuff they did, and then I started getting notes, and I keep them all in my wallet.
Yeah.
Nice.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Actually, it's 8 minutes now. But we can open the floor up to questions. So if you do have a question, feel free to come and stand by the not intimidating at all microphone. But while people decide whether or not they want to do that, I've got another question that I feel like we could go for as long as we like on this one. What is an assumption about production that people often get wrong?
That we're the team leaders.
Yes.
Sometimes we are. It's not uncommon because I feel like production is I won't talk too long because there's people lining up. Production is a sort of thing that a lot of producers are natural leaders, but we're not the team leaders, and we're often not the final decision makers
You're the facilitator.
And we're not the team mum either.
No,
we're
the
not
team
there to
mum.
make your lunch or cut your sandwiches or, feed any egos. We're there to facilitate you doing your best work. I think it's important to keep in mind.
I only feed my own ego.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate your talk. It's been quite enlightening. My question, as someone who's only just been recently into the games industry, but being a producer outside of it, I've only really experienced most production remotely. How have you seen the challenges of what's the differences between being the before times when it was just in the office and versus the remoteness and the hybrid stuff? Because I've noticed it's kind of sometimes a bit harder to catch up with, keep on touch with people with their work and whatnot without feeling a bit too clingy and
Lack of
micromanagey.
access to whiteboards.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think automation can really help, automate some of those conversations so that the responsibility isn't on an individual to constantly be in people's face.
Yeah.
By people can be mad at a robot, that's fine. Yeah. But if they're getting
Slapbot.
upset with you, that's going to make your life more difficult.
Yeah.
The hardest thing about remote production or asynchronous production is that you have to be way more careful with your wording. You can't be flippant. You need to read everything 3 times because it's really easy to fire something off when you're in I've got 2 minutes to respond to this and not think about how it might be read without tone.
Yeah.
So upskilling in terms of, again, those kind of softer skills and like genuinely really understanding the meaning of different words and what they can say.
One of the things that I've sort of struggled with a little bit, I guess, is a lot of, like in the before times when I was working from an office, a lot of my job was just overhearing people talking about something and then turning around and going, hey, what are you adding to the game? What's going on? Or just things like that. And so it's been trying to find a solution to that and it helps when everyone is working remotely because you see Slack and stuff like that, but I still don't have a perfect solution to it. The only thing I'll say is to talk to the team and find a communication way that works for you. Like I worked with one team where everyone would just sit on Discord like all day, and that works for some people. Where I work now, we don't sit on calls with each other all day, but we're very open to just like, hey, can we jump on a call real quick and discuss it? And everyone's very good at going, hey, I think we need this other person on as well.
Oh, cool.
I usually start with some sort of team agreements. Like back in the day, I just got more exercise because I'd obviously go to people's desk and I would never be sitting down. Now I don't. But regardless, whenever I start a project, I would say, okay, how are we going to work together based on what our working environment is, and have them say, okay, well, we want to have stand up at 10 a.m. or we want to, I don't know, sit on a Discord call or whatever it is. Get those things in place to start with, and then kind of iterate on them and pay attention to them.
And get them written down.
Yes,
like
written
track
down.
them so that when things change, you can go, hey, this is what we agreed on. And you're not going, oh, I thought we agreed on this.
And when things veer off course, think about whether or not you really should step in and push them back on early.
Speaking of stepping in,
Yes.
we have 5 minutes left, and
sorry.
there are 4 more
Let's
people.
go.
I reckon we
Let's
can
go.
do
Thank you.
1
Thank you
minute
very
per
much.
question.
Coming to me. Hello. So producers are also kind of acting as like an insulation from management in some ways, and you're privy to a lot of information about how things are going and whatnot. Is there ways that you would recommend for management to help producers keep them accountable?
Oh, I love that question. I think being willing to be vulnerable with the staff that are sitting at a similar level to you, because often, I think especially if you're a sole director, there is this desire to keep it like everything's good, everything's fine. If you don't let us in on the problems or the concerns that you're having, we have no capacity to change them. So actually forcing yourself to be a bit more vulnerable than you might like to be and being like, this is the thing that's really worrying me. You have to hire people that you feel comfortable pulling into that circle to that degree, and build that relationship because it's critical.
Awesome. Oh, good job.
Good answer.
In one, got
Mary.
it in one.
There'd be more.
Hello.
Hi.
I'd love to know if you have any advice for how you advocate for yourself as a producer or for kind of production in a company, because a lot of my experience has been me learning on the fly, not having a manager teach me, or I've had on-off mentorship, and so much of that has just been me just getting in and being like, yeah, I can do this. Can I? I don't know. It's working out. But like, I'd love to know, like, in that situation, if anyone else is like that and maybe the only one at their company and young in their career, what can they do to hopefully advocate for themselves and, production within their team?
Honestly, like my ability to advocate for myself just came with time and maturity, and maturity is not really the right word, but like, you know what I mean? Like just growing like in my confidence as a producer and my confidence in myself, and just, and also learning to not to not care about what people think of me, but just not being afraid to be like, just stand up for myself when I needed to.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, of course.
So if it's at the start of the project, I like to do a project charter. And what I will do in this is I will make sure that the scope of the work that I'm being asked to do and the responsibility that's putting on my shoulders is equal to the authority that I'm being given. I will write it down. I would say, okay, you want me to deliver, I don't know, a BMW. Well, in order to do that, I need to spend this amount of money. I need to be able to negotiate with the dealership. I need this, that, and the other thing, and I write it down. Then I put it in front of them. And if they start to argue with me about it, we'll have that conversation and negotiate out what my responsibilities will be. But when you're in an in-flight project and you have something coming up and it's like, oh, you don't know if you can do it or not. Well, if it's part of your job to do it, I just tend to be the person that assumes that it's okay for me to do it and let them yell at me if they think it's not. It's just my personality. But on the flip side, you need to be able to have that conversation. It's the same thing. You want me to do X. In order to do X, I need to be able to do Y. Are we in agreement that I can do Y? And it's just a conversation. You have to have it.
And write down and track your wins so that when you
Yes.
have a conversation, you're like, because they'll add up. and you can just be like, here are the things I've achieved. Like, here's the numbers,
Bam.
here's the information.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Good luck.
Hello.
We just got the.
Oh, we got the. I'm so sorry. Can we do
Can we
one
just
more
sneak two
question?
more in?
She's like, no, please get out.
We
Please,
can-
You got to stop.
I'm sure that we can like hang out outside and,
Yeah,
and
what is-
talk to people.
If people wanted to ask you questions and maybe didn't get the chance to, other than outside, what is some ways to connect with you all? And we can end it on that.
Twitter is best for me, @MaryH.
Yeah.
I have
Sa-
beaten up.
same. Mine's just at Cass Jade Gray, JADEGRAY. CASSS. I didn't spell those in order of it's Cass Jade Gray.
It's a riddle.
I'm on Meet to Match, so
Yeah,
you can just
yeah.
go
Oh,
find
yeah,
me
that
as
too.
Elizabeth Blythe. I'll be happy to catch up with you.
Yeah.
And also, I'll just stand outside the room anyway.
Yeah.
You know, walk up.
I'm also on Meet to Match.
Awesome.
As
Thank
am
you
I.
so much, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Thank you.